This is a psychological shadow that has haunted Gus his entire life. To collaborate with the Mexican criminal organization, Gus unintentionally offended them, resulting in his partner Max being killed on the spot. From that moment, a seed of hatred took root in Gus's heart. To avenge Max's tragic death, Gus endured hardship, pretending to work for the cartel. Years later, Gus, with his outstanding sales skills, had surpassed Hector's gang. Even when delivering money to Don, he packaged it meticulously. In contrast to Hector's disorganized bundles of cash, Don clearly preferred Gus's method of tribute. Tang ordered Hector to follow Gus's rules and even put on the t-shirt Gus had given him. Proud Hector couldn't swallow this humiliation, especially with his recent transport routes being disrupted. Thus, Hector came to the chicken restaurant looking for trouble. Hector demanded the manager call the boss, but the manager said the boss wasn't there. Since he was there, Hector wouldn't leave easily. He declared he could wait and ignored the no smoking sign, arrogantly puffing on a cigar. Customers immediately sensed the danger, and some parents with children tried to leave but were blocked by Arturo. Seeing this, Nacho quickly signaled to Arturo, who then allowed the customers to leave. This highlights Nacho's character. Although forced to work for a criminal organization, he has a kind heart. Despite the manager's pleas, Hector forced his way into Gus's office to wait. At that moment, Gus was at the fire station recruiting talent. Upon receiving an urgent call from his employee, he rushed to the chicken restaurant. Seeing his employees threatened, Gus immediately gave them paid leave for the day.
We are closed for today.
Apart from being a cartel member, Gus was undoubtedly a good boss. After the employees left, Gus headed straight to the office to confront Hector, using the cartel's interests to protect himself. But Hector, claiming to represent the cartel, forcibly demanded Gus assist with shipments and used Gus's pen to scrape dirt from his shoe onto the desk. No matter how arrogant Hector was, Gus tolerated him without direct confrontation. Only after achieving his goal did Hector leave. However, Hector was unaware that Gus, in secret collaboration with Mike, was behind the disruption of his transport routes. While Hector appeared to have succeeded, Gus was the true victor. As promised, Gus had his men fulfill their agreement with Mike, who refused the thousands of dollars in payment. Feeling this action was for himself, Mike's style of doing things also set the stage for Gus to seek his help again in the future. The next day at work, Gus gathered his employees together to dispel the fear Hector and his men had instilled in them the day before. Gus concocted a benevolent lie on the spot, and with an inspiring speech, he quickly restored the employees to their normal working state. Meanwhile, to help Jimmy deal with Chuck, Kim made numerous calls to repair companies. Since Jimmy had kicked down Chuck's door earlier, Kim deduced that Chuck would schedule a door repair service. Finally, Kim found the company Chuck had scheduled with and extracted the appointment time, then canceled the service under a pretext. Gene handed the information to Jimmy and was worried about the person he had chosen. Jimmy reassured Kim, saying that the person he found was the best of the best. That person was none other than Mike, who had collaborated with Jimmy multiple times. Chuck, without suspicion, invited Mike into his home and explained his needs. Mike first pretended to ask where the power source was. Chuck explained that there was no electricity, and that he had asked his assistant to make that clear when he made the appointment. Then Mike took out an electric wrench.
I'm sorry. I understood there would be no power tools of any kind.
What, a screwdriver and a hammer? Turns a morning job into 2 days with me, myself, and Ben Gay. But it's your call.
I suppose. Very well.
The shrill sound of the electric tool made Chuck anxious, which was precisely Jimmy's plan. To make himself more comfortable, Chuck retreated upstairs, giving Mike the opportunity to take covert photos. These photos were essential to Jimmy's plan. Mike handed the completed photos to Jimmy, who praised Mike profusely. Then Jimmy asked Mike for a note containing Chuck's ex-wife Rebecca's contact information. Rebecca was a crucial part of Jimmy's strategy against Chuck, setting the stage for the next episode where Jimmy invites Rebecca. Jimmy also asked Mike for his impression of Chuck, hoping to hear that Chuck was a jerk, but Mike's tasks never involved personal judgments. Seeing Mike remain silent, Jimmy didn't press further and instead confirmed how well the door repair was done. Mike assured Jimmy that Chuck wouldn't complain, since Jimmy hadn't charged Mike for acting as a lookout at the chicken restaurant. They were even. That evening, Gus went to Mike's workplace to have a talk. Questioning why Mike hadn't accepted the agreed-upon payment, Mike candidly said he sabotaged Hector's business for his own reasons, not for Gus. Gus understood that Mike sought revenge for innocent civilians, making him feel better. Gus, having guessed most of Mike's motives, received no denial from Mike. Gus admitted learning a lot from Mike and suggested that Mike consider working for him in the near future. After a moment's thought, Mike agreed but stipulated it would depend on the specifics of the work. Just as Gus was about to leave, he revealed the true reason he stopped Mike from killing Hector.
I stopped you from killing Hector.
Like you said, it wasn't in your interest.
A bullet to the head would have been far too humane.
This echoes the beginning where Max is brutally murdered by Hector. No one but Gus could take Hector's head, laying the groundwork for Gus's eventual fate. The next day, Jimmy and Chuck arrived at Kyra's office for the pretrial transfer. Before beginning, Kyra chatted casually with Chuck and Howard, indicating their familiarity with her. Clearly, Jimmy and Kim were at a disadvantage. Kyra outlined the situation Jimmy would face, including his confession being submitted to the New Mexico Bar Association. All of this was within Jimmy's expectations. During the meeting, the parties disputed a particular testimony. After reaching an agreement, just when Jimmy thought it was over, Kyra insisted that Jimmy apologize to Chuck in person. Reluctantly, knowing he was at fault, Jimmy complied.
I'm very sorry. I lost my temper and I did some things, so many things that I regret. I shouldn't have broken down your door. Doesn't matter how I was provoked. I shouldn't have done that. There's no excuse for that or for the things that I said. I regret it all of it, more than you can imagine, because you're my brother, and no one should treat his own brother like that. Not ever.
Though on the surface he was apologizing, he was actually mocking Chuck's behavior. Finally, Kyra demanded that Jimmy compensate Chuck for the damages, totaling $321. Unexpectedly, Chuck added $2.98 for the damaged tape recorder. Kyra agreed to Chuck's request. Chuck relished the feeling of victory. After the meeting, Jimmy stormed out, pretending to be furious. He didn't bother saying goodbye to Chuck. Kim then reminded Chuck and Howard that she would file a motion to suppress the tape recording at the hearing. Howard responded that the tape had already been destroyed by Jimmy, but Kim was prepared. She revealed that the destroyed tape was a copy. She explained that Chuck knew Jimmy would come for him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have hired a private investigator as a witness. Therefore, Chuck must have hidden the original tape. Howard was about to continue arguing, but Chuck stopped him. Chuck directly admitted that the destroyed tape was indeed a copy and stated that the original would be played when necessary. With that, he left with Howard. What Chuck and Howard didn't realize was that this was a test by Kim. When Kim exited the elevator, Jimmy, who had been waiting, quickly asked her for information.
Bingo.
It seemed they were confident in their plan. This is the most thrilling episode of Better Call Saul Season 3, where the protagonist Jimmy faces off against his brother Chuck in court. Will the cunning Chuck outmaneuver the silver-tongued Jimmy, or will Jimmy prevail? Stay tuned to find out. Faced with Chuck's accusations, Jimmy and Kim have already set their plan in motion. Working seamlessly together, they not only gathered crucial evidence but also tested Chuck's next moves. Through Mike's introduction, Jimmy brought a goldfish to meet Caldera, only to get scolded. Caldera cared more about the animals than people. Jimmy's purpose was to get Caldera to introduce him to a highly professional pickpocket, an essential part of his plan against Chuck. After confirming that Jimmy wouldn't confine the person he introduced like a goldfish, Caldera agreed to Jimmy's request. Meanwhile, Kim proactively approached Kevin, the president of Mesa Verde Bank, and confessed about Chuck's accusation that Jimmy tampered with the bank's address. She wanted the client to hear the news from her first, to appear more honest. Since Kim had won the case for Mesa Verde Bank, Kevin admired her abilities. Kevin didn't care about Chuck's accusations against Jimmy and was happy to invite Kim to dinner. Chuck, on the other hand, wasn't idle. The day before the hearing, he sneaked into the courtroom to ensure he wouldn't be disturbed by strong electromagnetic radiation. However, Howard had concerns. After sending the staff away, he privately discussed the matter with Chuck. Howard worried about Chuck's health and suggested he shouldn't testify in person. With solid evidence, Howard's presence alone would suffice. Chuck, shrewd as always, saw through Howard's real concern. It wasn't about his health but about the reputation of HHM if he screwed up. Howard didn't deny it, citing the loss of the Mesa Verde case as the best example. But Chuck was not listening. He needed to see Jimmy disbarred with his own eyes to feel at ease. The firm's interests were not on Chuck's mind. The next day, in court, Chuck's attorney, Allie, presented a series of charges against Jimmy, requesting the Bar Association revoke Jimmy's license. When it was Kim's turn, she first acknowledged Jimmy's crimes and expressed his deep regret. Then, Kim revealed the reasons behind the incidents, arguing that if the full context were understood, the association would see Jimmy as an indispensable member of the legal community. Howard, as a witness, detailed the events as they happened. Through her questioning, Kim successfully got Howard to admit that Chuck prevented HHM from hiring Jimmy to avoid nepotism. Even though Jimmy worked diligently and earned Howard's recognition, it was to no avail. Hearing this, Allie accused Kim of going off topic, but Kim argued it was crucial for understanding the brothers' relationship. The judge, considering the situation, allowed Kim to continue but reminded her to stay on topic, as the hearing was about Jimmy, not Chuck. Kim then continued questioning Howard, confirming that it was Jimmy who took care of Chuck during his illness. Even when Jimmy was extremely busy, Howard didn't deny this. Kim continued to ask Howard if he was aware of Chuck's psychological condition. Before Howard could answer, Allie immediately objected, claiming that Chuck's mental health was not relevant to the discussion. This time, the judge halted Kim and dismissed Howard from the stand. Jimmy realized that his key witness had not yet arrived. Seeing his assistant Francesca shake her head slightly, Jimmy knew something had gone wrong. Allie requested to play the recording in court. Although Kim knew she couldn't prevent it, she still had to formally object, as the recording was about to be played. Jimmy asked Francesca why the witness hadn't arrived yet. Francesca explained that the flight had been delayed by 40 minutes. Jimmy then deliberately looked for excuses to stall for time. Meanwhile, Chuck was at home rehearsing the statement he planned to make in court. He tried various statements, but none of them felt satisfactory, indicating how seriously he took this hearing. At that moment, Howard personally arrived to pick up Chuck. As he left, Chuck muttered something under his breath.
The law is too important.
And the hearing has already begun to play the recording.
You'd go to such lengths to humiliate me.
I did it for Kim. She worked her butt off to get Mesa Verde while you and Howard sat around sipping scotch and chortling. Hamlin, McGill, more like Scrooge and Marley. Kim deserves Mesa Verde, not you, not HHM. She earned it and she needs it. I did it to help her, but I honestly didn't think it would hurt you so bad. I thought you'd just say, I made a mistake and go on with your life like a normal person, but oh no, wishful thinking. So can I tell Howard you're not quitting or retiring or whatever? Can we take all this down off the walls? I'm gonna go call Howard.
Jimmy, you do realize you just confessed to a felony?
Yes. But you feel better, right? Besides, it's your word against mine.
After hearing the recording, everyone could understand Jimmy's actions, while his methods weren't commendable. The story behind them was quite touching at least. Kim was moved by Jimmy's actions. Next, in anticipation of Chuck's court appearance, everyone cooperated by temporarily turning in their mobile phones and other electronic devices. Jimmy, however, lied that he had left his phone in the car and didn't turn it in, setting the stage for later events. Then the staff turned off all the lights in the room, even covering the clock on the wall. Notably, the time now read 12:16, the exact numbers Jimmy had altered in Mesa Verde Bank's address. Meanwhile, Howard had brought Chuck downstairs. As Chuck ascended the stairs, he accidentally bumped into a man. What Chuck didn't know was that this man was part of Jimmy's master plan. This man would later become Saul's bodyguard in Breaking Bad. At the hearing, the judge asked Chuck what the motivation behind the recording was. Chuck explained that he suspected Jimmy of altering the address in a case he was handling, which caused him to lose a client. Jimmy did this to help his girlfriend Kim, resulting in the client choosing Kim instead. Kim objected to this. Chuck quickly clarified that he wasn't accusing Kim of being an accomplice. He was merely stating the outcome. Allie asked if Chuck had any evidence to support his suspicion of Jimmy. Chuck admitted he had no evidence because Jimmy was too cunning, perfectly covering his tracks. Kim immediately objected, arguing that without evidence, Chuck couldn't prove Jimmy's guilt. The judge allowed Chuck to finish his statement and told Kim she could cross-examine him directly if she had any questions. Chuck revealed his plan, stating that the recording was only the first step. He acknowledged that a single recording wasn't enough to convict Jimmy. He guessed that Jimmy would care about this recording. Jimmy breaking into his house and destroying the recording was the best proof. Kim immediately countered that this was all Chuck's subjective speculation. How could he know what Jimmy was thinking? The judge sustained the objection and instructed Chuck to only describe the events in detail. The judge noted that Chuck seemed somewhat mentally disturbed in the recording. Chuck explained that he was pretending and deliberately exaggerating his condition to uncover the truth. The judge asked Chuck to describe his condition so everyone could better understand the case. Chuck confessed that he had electromagnetic hypersensitivity, but this was Chuck's own claim. No professional doctor had diagnosed him. Chuck argued that many diseases were initially undiagnosed. Given the rarity of his symptoms, it would take time to explain. He insisted that the condition did not affect his mental judgment, only causing physical pain. Allie asked Chuck one final question: did he hate his brother Jimmy? Chuck replied that he loved his brother. Jimmy wasn't inherently bad, but he often did terrible things for supposedly noble reasons. However, to Chuck, the law was sacred and inviolable. Chuck stated he didn't want to hurt Jimmy but wanted to protect what he respected. His words were ironic. From Jimmy's perspective, they applied equally well to Chuck. Jimmy appeared more genuine. He believed Chuck had wronged Kim by taking her client, so he used his skills to win the case back for her. But Chuck came across as hypocritical. He claimed the sanctity of the law to satisfy his selfish desires. Chuck couldn't stand the idea of Jimmy succeeding in the legal field more than him. Noticing that a key person hadn't arrived yet, Jimmy had Kim request a recess to buy some time. Shortly after, Chuck's ex-wife Rebecca arrived at the hearing. Much to Chuck's surprise, the last time he'd seen Rebecca was a few years ago. At that time, Jimmy suggested that Chuck confess his illness to Rebecca, but Chuck didn't take Jimmy's advice. He didn't want Rebecca to know about his bizarre illness. During a dinner with Rebecca, she unexpectedly received a call from her boss, causing extreme discomfort for electromagnetically sensitive Chuck. Due to the length of Rebecca's phone call, Chuck could no longer bear it. He eventually grabbed Rebecca's phone and threw it away, scolding her for being extremely rude. Rebecca couldn't understand Chuck's behavior. The carefully prepared candlelight dinner ended prematurely. As Rebecca was about to leave, Jimmy urged Chuck to confess his condition, believing Rebecca would understand. But Chuck remained adamant, and so Rebecca was kept in the dark to prevent his law license from being revoked. Jimmy revealed Chuck's condition to Rebecca. As a result, Rebecca traveled a long way to see Chuck. Seeing Rebecca left Chuck flustered, and he requested a break from the judge. He assumed Jimmy had summoned Rebecca as a witness, but Rebecca said she was there out of concern for Chuck's health, scolding him for not telling her sooner. Chuck explained that he didn't want Rebecca to worry. In reality, he feared she would look down on him. Seeing Chuck's displeasure, Rebecca decided to leave the hearing to avoid distracting him, but Chuck insisted that Rebecca stay. Wanting her to see Jimmy's true nature, Kim reminded Jimmy that Rebecca would hate him after this was over, but Jimmy no longer cared. The brothers then entered battle mode. Jimmy knew that Chuck's supposed electromagnetic hypersensitivity was actually a psychological condition. When Chuck was arrested by the police for buying the neighbor's newspaper, he was sent to the hospital because of his overreaction. The doctors secretly turned on electrical devices, but Chuck felt nothing. Jimmy and Kim had noticed this. If Jimmy could disprove Chuck's ability to sense electromagnetic radiation, his lie would collapse. So, Jimmy began to steer the questioning in that direction. He asked Chuck what he felt when he touched the tape recorder. If Chuck couldn't withstand the electromagnetic radiation, how did he manage to record secretly? Chuck said that he did feel uncomfortable, but the short duration of radiation from the tape recorder was within his tolerance, and he had hidden the tape recorder under a radiation-proof space blanket. Jimmy asked Chuck to describe what the home environment was like at the time of the recording. Chuck answered honestly, saying he covered the room with space blankets. Jimmy suggested this was part of Chuck's elaborate trap. Chuck countered that it was just a way for him to exaggerate his condition in order to get Jimmy to tell the truth. Jimmy asked how Chuck knew this tactic would ensnare him, but these were subjective speculations, and the opposing lawyer objected. Jimmy began using evidence to counter Chuck. He implied Chuck's actions were erratic and hinted at a mental illness. Chuck maintained his initial stance, saying he exaggerated his condition and that his house was normal. Jimmy takes out the photos that Mike helped him take, and sees the exposed wires and petrol lamps, which no one in their right mind would live like this. Chuck claimed these were precautions against the pain electromagnetic radiation caused him. Jimmy argued that without a doctor's diagnosis, Chuck's self-diagnosed condition couldn't be proven. Allie continued to object, stating this was not valid evidence and that the jury had already ruled Chuck's mental health was not under scrutiny. But Jimmy countered, saying that since Chuck claimed he exaggerated his condition, he had the right to question further. To understand his perspective, they needed to see things from his viewpoint regarding Chuck. Jimmy believed Chuck hated him and had tricked him into confessing, while he deceived Chuck to make him feel better. Understanding who to believe required comprehending Chuck's mindset. The judge found some merit in Jimmy's argument and allowed him to continue questioning. Jimmy pointed out that Chuck's symptoms appeared shortly after his divorce, asking if the stress from the divorce caused them. Chuck denied this, stating he had a good relationship with his ex-wife despite their divorce. Jimmy wanted Chuck to recall their last meeting, during which Chuck hid his condition from Rebecca at dinner, but Allie objected, saying this wasn't family court and questioned the relevance of Jimmy's inquiries. Smarty Pants Chuck says he knows why Jimmy invited Rebecca to court.
He knows I still have a lot of feeling for my ex-wife. He's hoping this will break me down. Split me apart at the seams like a murderer confessing on an episode of Perry Mason. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, Jimmy. Have I answered your questions to your satisfaction?
The look in Chuck's eyes showed how pleased he was, believing Jimmy was about to lose his law license, fulfilling Chuck's long-held desire. However, Chuck's current satisfaction would soon turn to misery. Jimmy played his final card, asking Chuck to describe the detailed symptoms of his electromagnetic hypersensitivity. Jimmy then gives Francesca a wink and tells her to go out and bring in the witness Huel. Chuck thanked the court for removing all electronic devices, making him feel no electromagnetic interference, but Jimmy questioned why Chuck couldn't feel the emergency exit lights, which couldn't be turned off. Chuck explained that those lights didn't carry much current and were far from him. According to the inverse square law, the intensity weakened with distance. Chuck's explanation was thorough, but he was unknowingly walking into Jimmy's trap. Jimmy asked, since distant things couldn't be felt, could he feel something close by? Chuck replied in the affirmative. He seemed to see Jimmy's little trick and said there was something in Jimmy's pocket. Jimmy admitted he hadn't surrendered his phone. The judge scolded Jimmy for not following the special requirements, but Chuck wasn't alarmed. He was confident and picked up the phone to check.
Just as I thought. There's no battery in here. You removed the battery.
Could you reach into your breast pocket and tell me what's there?
What now?
To Chuck's shock, he found a battery in his pocket. Jimmy called his witness, Huel, to the stand. Jimmy said the battery had been in Chuck's pocket for an hour and a half and was fully charged. Jimmy then placed the battery in a phone to demonstrate, exposing Chuck's lie. Allie panicked and admitted that Chuck's mental illness wasn't the issue. Hearing this, Chuck lost his composure.
If he were schizophrenic, it wouldn't take away from the fact that the defendant...
I am not crazy!
This is the best part of Chuck's performance. He said all his resentment towards Jimmy in one breath.
Jimmy! He through a sunroof! And I saved him! And I shouldn't have. I took him into my own firm! What was I thinking? He'll never change. He'll never change. Ever since he was 9, always the same. Couldn't keep his hands out of the cash drawer. But not our Jimmy. Couldn't be precious Jimmy. Stealing them blind. And he gets to be a lawyer? What a sick joke. I should have stopped him when I had the chance. And you have to stop him.
By the time Chuck realized it, it was too late. Rebecca and Howard looked down in disappointment. This outcome had been anticipated by Kim and Jimmy. Chuck, thinking he'd come out as the victor, instead faced a spectacular downfall. Finally, Chuck glanced at the emergency exit sign. At that moment, he probably wished he could escape as quickly as possible.